So that'll be back with us shortly. I'll tell you more about what makes this a rather unusual Yak 3 compared with the wartime originals, but now lifting off very close to where the Lynx that we saw earlier is parked on the flight line. The Westland Wasp, HAS-1. Helicopter designs were produced at once by the Saunders Row company, which was later taken over by Westland. One was an anti-tank helicopter for the Army Air Corps, the Scout, which we'll see on the programme later. The other was what was known as a manned torpedo-carrying helicopter for the Royal Navy, which initially went under the rather charming name of Sea Scout, which they then changed to Wasp. And that term, manned torpedo-carrying helicopter, really epitomises what this was all about. It has no sonar on board. It was largely seen as being a weapon-carrying platform only, which would be sent and directed to its target by its parent Royal Navy small ship, by other vessels, or indeed by a Wessex HAS-3 helicopter to attack an enemy submarine. They were able to operate up to 100 miles from their mother ship of one of the Royal Navy's small ships. The wheels can be locked if required, but not for ground taxiing purposes. The Wasp must always hover taxi into a parking position. Now, one thing that's really notable about the Wasp is the small tail rotor, which makes manoeuvring out of wind quite difficult due to the pilot's lack of rotor authority, even in moderate winds. As with quite a number of British military types, it took far longer than expected for the Wasp to earn its spurs in combat, because of the fact that thankfully the Cold War didn't turn truly hot. In the case of the Wasp, this happened during the Falklands War of 1982. Already by then, the retirement of the Wasp in favour of the Lynx had started in Royal Navy service, but nonetheless 11 of these little helicopters served during Operation Corporate in the South Atlantic. They flew from 8 ships, a combination of frigates, the ice patrol ship HMS Endurance, a container ship and survey ships. And their most famous exploit occurred on the 25th of April 1982. On that date, 3 Wasps flying from HMS Endurance and the Type 12 frigate HMS Plymouth were joined by a Wessex and 2 Lynx to attack the Argentinian submarine Santa Fe, which had been resupplying Argentine positions on the island of South Georgia with troops and equipment. The Wasps used AS-12 wire-guided missiles to attacked the Santa Fe, and the submarine ended up being abandoned. It was thus the first naval casualty of the Falklands conflict. 133 Wasps were built in total, of which 96 served with the Royal Navy. They were also bought by several overseas customers: Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Netherlands, New Zealand and South Africa. The Royal Navy here retired the Wasp in 1988, when the last of the Navy's Type 12 frigates was decommissioned. 10 years later, Indonesia and New Zealand phased the Wasp out. Malaysia was the last country to do so as late as the year 2000. The one we see here is owned today by John Heath, and it's painted in the markings of a Wasp that was flown from HMS Aeroviewtv a Leander-class frigate. It served first with the Royal Navy, then the Royal New Zealand Navy, with whom for a time it was painted in a very outlandish-looking overall red scheme for peacekeeping duties in Papua New Guinea, where a civil war was being fought by a separatist movement. And it's one of numerous Wasps now airworthy in civilian hands in the UK, of which we've got 2 here. Have a look at this Wasp close up. It is absolutely immaculate. It was one of the top prize-winning aircraft in the Freddie March Spirit of Aviation Concours d'Elegance contest at the Goodwood Revival, no less, a few years ago. It's a really good example, rather like the Hurricane we saw earlier in relation to its owner James Brown, of a private owner fulfilling a dream by owning and flying an historic aeroplane. Because John Heath, who owns this Wasp, he's not flying it for us at the moment, really fell in love with this quirky little helicopter, decided he wanted one, and was able to fulfill that dream, and the result is one of the most outstanding examples to be seen flying anywhere. Flying it for us today was Dr. Terry Martin, who we've seen here in his own Wasp in the past. In fact, he owned this one for a time before it was bought by John Heath. Terry's own Wasp is currently out of action, and he was telling me earlier that John's flies very differently from his own. It's quite interesting that 2 aircraft of the same type should have, he says, such different piloting characteristics. So there he was, Terry Martin flying John Heath's Westland Wasp. But now we're turning back to the aircraft we saw getting airborne a little while ago.